Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. This week we're talking about UFC Vegas 111, which is headlined by a welterweight matchup between Gabriel Bonfim and Randy Brown. Decent fighters, main event worthy, maybe not so much. We had kind of the same situation last week with Steve Garcia and David Onama, and I think that main event delivered in terms of entertainment value. This could match that as well in terms of entertainment value. So, an Apex card, I'm willing to give the UFC a pass for this type of main event, but there are some low-key bangers on this card. One that just comes off the top of my head, Christian Leroy Duncan going up against Marco Tulio. That's a phenomenal fight that I can't wait to see go down in the middleweight division. We did have a fight actually fall out earlier today. Not sure if the fighter will get a replacement, but Christian Quinones forced out of his matchup against Adrian Yanez, and now Yanez, again, kind of unsure whether he's going to get a replacement for this weekend or not. But if he does, I will drop a separate breakdown for that fight once odds release later on in the week. Obviously, this is the first video I'm doing after the Blue Jays had a heartbreaking loss in Game 7 against the Los Angeles Dodgers. You guys obviously know the Blue Jays has been synonymous in my videos over the last month, all of October pretty much. And I thought I'd wear it one last time in salute to the Blue Jays and the type of season they had, the type of run they made in the playoffs, going down 0-2 against the Mariners in the ALCS, and then rally back and then obviously win that series, going down to the Dodgers as well. I think they went down 2-1. They managed to get it back to 3-2 in the series, and then obviously Dodgers forced the Game 7. The great pitching by Yoshinobu Yamamoto. I think he might be the best pitcher in the league, so to have to go up against him, in Game 6, obviously come up short that night, and then in Game 7 he comes in as a reliever and does the work that he does. Tough to overcome a pitcher like that, no matter how good our bullpen was doing as well. So, very unfortunate loss. I am still proud of what they were able to do. Nobody really gave them much of a shot. Dodgers were minus 225 to win the series at the beginning of the series, but obviously Blue Jays stretched them a lot more than people were expecting. And I'm hoping they can keep the team together as much as they can for this next season to try to replicate that type of run. But it was crazy. The emotions, the roller coaster, everything. I was glad to really hone in on baseball as much as I did for the postseason because it was a blast of a ride. So, yeah. Last time I'll wear the Blue Jays hat, consecutively as I will here. Obviously, I'll throw it back on every now and then. But in terms of saluting the Blue Jays one last time and for a great postseason and the emotions that they were able to capture from all the fans, hats off to them. Very happy about that. All right, now with that out of the way, let's get down to some UFC business here. We got we'll do a quick recap of UFC Vegas 110 in terms of our lock of the night and dog of the night plays. Then we'll get into a few quick plugs, and then we'll get into the breakdowns here for, I believe, this 12-fight card for UFC Vegas 111. So for this past weekend, we did manage to finally get the one key off our back with the lock of the night play. October was brutal for lock of the night plays. I think I went 0-4 for the UFC, but we did manage to start off on the right foot in November with Billy Alicana getting that finish over Kevin Christian. We cashed Alicana at minus 240. We did drop the ball on our OKTAGON lock of the night play, so we did go 1-1 this past weekend, which now brings our yearly record to 53-36 with a 60% hit rate. Again, it's going to be tough to finish in the profit this year, considering the detriment of October, but we'll do our best. For dog of the night play, we went with Cedricus Dumas. It was a very unpopular play. We did get to see Dante Johnson extended a little bit more, but it seemed to me that Dumas was just not fully prepared for that fight in terms of his cardio not being in check. He was throwing a lot of weird, unorthodox techniques, tried getting to his grappling, didn't have much success there. And then by that second round, he's completely gassed, and Johnson was able to get that quick tap from him there. So, that was I can't remember the last time I was ragged on for an underdog pick as much as I was for Dumas. again, given the circumstances there, it was a hard number for me to pass up on against somebody that was as unproven as Deontay Johnson. And if Johnson continues to be that big of a favorite against other UFC veterans, obviously given the stylistic matchup, I may consider fading him again. But Dumas was definitely not the spot. So I'll take that L on the chin. It happens every so often. We did miss out on our Octagon Dog of the Night play as well. I can't recall it off the top of my head. But we are now 51-60 on the year for Dog of the Night plays for a 46% hit rate, but firmly in the profit there. So I'm happy about that. Let's see how we can do over the next couple weeks before the calendar year wraps up. All right, quick plugs here. We do have another regional event this week, and I believe it is LFA 221, which goes down in Brazil. That I will be dropping a Legacy Warriors podcast for you guys on Thursday to break down that card in its entirety. Obviously, I'll have a written breakdown of it as well on the Patreon page, which is also where you'll be able to find tracked plays for both the UFC and LFA. So if you're interested in that, make sure you guys check out the MMALOTN Patreon page. And secondly, I have gotten back to the live streamings for members only on YouTube. My usual days will now be Wednesday from 6 p.m. Eastern to 7 p.m. Eastern, and then on fight days from 1 p.m. Eastern to 2 p.m. Eastern. So you guys can hit that join button right below this video here, and you guys will get notified whenever I go live. It will mainly be Wednesdays and Saturdays. So make sure you guys tap in for that. Appreciate everybody that's already signed up for it already, but I'd love to chat with more of you guys in the comment section or in the chat for that members only live stream YouTube video. So make sure you guys hit that up, and I'll see you guys in the chat as well. All right. We'll move over to the bantamweights now, where we got Miles Johns coming in at plus 145, going up against Daniel Marcos, who comes in at minus 170. Now, Johns is coming off of a 2-fight losing streak, the first of which he got swept on the scorecards by Felipe Lima, who dictated the pace of that fight, really butchered Johns on the feet, mixed it up in the grappling realm as well, and Johns had no answer for it. That was followed up with a split decision loss to Gene Matsumoto for Johns, but that was a fight that I thought it was fairly obvious that Matsumoto won round 2 and round 3 by out-damaging and maybe not out-grappling Johns, but getting some good positions and getting off on some damage there. Johns was able to end that fight with some control for about 45 seconds to 60 seconds, but he didn't outweigh any of the damage that Matsumoto did for the first 4 minutes of that round. Johns is improved from earlier on in his career, that's without a doubt. We saw very good versions of him when he went up against Dan Argueta, Cody Gibson, even Douglas Silva, D'Andrade, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to him joining the likes of the Marathon MMA guys. It's a small, tight-knit group led by Trey Ogden, and he does a great job in terms of game planning for his opponents and really helping Johns maximize his efficiency given the style that he normally brings to the table. Johns, explosive, fast striker with some, underrated power, but he is a guy that suffered from cardio issues and not being as effective later on in fights because of him slowing down and not throwing as much output. So he was able to mix in a lot of footwork, a lot of movement, a lot of lateral movement, mixing in the grappling at opportune moments as well, and that would help him win those fights in deeper water. But when he's going up against guys that can, thwart that movement with volume of their own, guys that can stop the takedowns in the clinch game and really batter him on the feet and land more damage, those are the guys that end up getting the nod over Johns. And we've seen it in his last 2 fights where he can't really muzzle Matsumoto or Lima, especially in deeper water, after having early success, specifically in that Gene Matsumoto fight. He's still only 31 years old, so maybe that experience is good for him and we'll see him get better off of those losses, but it really comes down to the stylistic approach he has ahead of him if he can actually get the win or not. Is going up against a tough stylistic clash here in Daniel Marcos, who suffered his first pro loss last time out against Montel Jackson. That was his first loss in 18 pro MMA fights, but at 32 years old, I think he's firmly still in his prime and still capable of high-level performances. At his best, Marcos does a great job in terms of dictating the pace, the range, and his footwork to really fuel that calf kicking style that he likes to implement. And then from there, he lets go with really good combinations that often sting his opponents down the pipe. Now, he has very much struggled to get off on finishes at the UFC level, but I think he was close to getting one against Arichi Lang before that unintentional foul that ultimately ended that fight due to a no contest. But He was in his bag that night, landing damage, touching up Arichi Lang, and showcasing how good he can be. I was very impressed with his wins over John Castaneda and even Adrian Yanez. We saw Yanez have some good success in that second round against Marcos, but Marcos really got it together in the third again and was able to grind out crucial positions to win that fight on the scorecards. Against Montel Jackson, he was able to get 5.5 minutes of control time, but he really could not outdo the type of damage that Jackson was landing whenever they were in the striking realm, utilizing his speed and power advantage over Marcos. It was a tough spot for Marcos to really get off on much success of his own. But again, a guy that's very talented, very disciplined with his striking approach, and he has good enough grappling to get him out of sticky situations, just as we saw when he went up against Adrian Yanez. Now here against Johns, this could be competitive early, but I think the deeper we get it into this matchup, we'll see Marcos's disciplined style really help him get the better of Johns. You know, Johns is a little bit wide and erratic with the shots that he lands down the pipe. His speed obviously helps him be more successful with that style than most other guys. But I think Marcos's sharp shooting style of just straight shots down the pipe, moving a lot, maintaining that range, utilizing the leg kick to try to slow Johns down, that will start to pay off for him more and more as we get into the second and third rounds. And that's where I think we'll see Marcos really start to separate himself from Miles Johns' style. So I like Marcos here a fair bit. Again, a lot of people are lower on him than I am, but I think that this is a style and stylistic clash that Marcos can very much benefit from. And again, calf kicks, movement, range management, and really turning it up in the second and third rounds as John starts to slow on his output and really start to feel the impact of the leg kicks and other damage that Marcos is able to land. So give me Marcos and Marcos by decision. Our next up in the strawweight division, we got veteran Tisha Pennington looking to earn her third straight victory, coming in at plus 150, going up against Denise Gomes, who comes in at minus 175, who's looking for her fourth straight victory. Now, start off on the Pennington side of things, who had a 2-fight losing streak, both by split decision at the hands of eventual champion Mackenzie Dern, and then she had a 2-year layoff where she gave birth and pretty much got back into shape to try to get back into the fight game, and then she came up short against Tabitha Ricci in a very close split decision loss. But since then, she was able to avenge an early loss to Carla Esparza by nullifying the takedowns of Esparza and then just battering her on the feet. And then last time around, she was a minus 400 favorite against Luana Pinheiro, and it played out closer than that, but I thought it was pretty obvious that Pennington won the first and third rounds by outstriking Pinheiro. She ate some big shots in the second round, but her durability held strong. Never being finished in 22 pro fights goes to show there with Pennington's, her durability, her conditioning. It's very high level. She's one of the more athletic fighters in the strawweight division, and she's managed to keep that up throughout her career, especially now being 36 years old, 13 years into her career, if I'm not mistaken as well. She's been around a long time and faced all levels of competition too. Now she's going up against the 25-year-old Denise Gomes, who's 11 years younger than Tisha Pennington, and we are seeing improvements in Gomez's game. She lost that fight to Angela Hill, where she just couldn't get a beat on Hill, and Hill was able to have a little bit of grappling success as well. But then Gomes was able to stop the smothering and grindy nature of Eduardo Mora. She was able to beat her on the scorecards. Then she completely outstruck and dominated Karolina Kowalkiewicz. And then against Elise Reed last time, Reed may have been a good Taekwondo specialist, but as soon as she felt the power of Gomes, it was clear that Reed was like, oh, I want none of this. I think that's why she accepted the bottom position as much as she did in that first round when Gomes went for the takedown and got that top position. And then in the second round, as soon as Gomes landed a big shot, we saw Reed fold, and Gomes showed her the door that night. But Gomes, slick striker, stinging power, improving grappling game. She has some good speed on her as well, and she's slowly accruing more experience that will help her as she gets deeper into her UFC career. And the fact, that she's already 5-2 in the promotion against some decent competition as well, she could have a pretty high ceiling if her game continues to evolve at the rate that it is. This one's a tough one. if Gomes was the underdog, I'd probably consider a little bit of a shot there. I just think she's a little bit better in the striking realm in terms of landing with more emphatic damage. Pennington could make this close with her volume and her movement. Also, if Pennington chooses to grapple here, she could have some success there. But I think Gomes is strong enough to really nullify most of that from Pennington, get this fight into purely being a striking battle. And then I think as Gomes starts landing more damage and the heavier shots, the judges will end up scoring that more favorably than the type of work that Pennington is doing. But this is not a spot where I would, take Gomes at 65% indicated. Pennington has a way and the experience to make this much closer than that. So I'm not hitting on anybody that's taking a bit of a shot on Pennington here as a plus 150 dog. But I can't get there. I'm going to go Gomes and Gomes by decision, but not with a whole lot of confidence either. All right, next up in the heavyweight division, we got the UFC debut of two guys actually here, where we got Josh Hokit, fresh off of his Contender Series winning performance against Guilherme Uriel, coming in at minus 340, going up against Max Gimenis, who is a multiple-time BJJ world champion, 6-1 now as a professional MMA fighter, to which he turned his attention back to in early 2022. Interesting signing. Now he's going up against Josh Hokit. Hokit is undefeated in his 6 pro MMA fights and faced some decent competition on his rise to the Contender Series and finished pretty much every single one of his opponents. He's gone out there and really just put it on his opponents. He's gone into deep water and still come out with a submission win. He relies heavily on his wrestling game, but his striking game, as basic as it is very impressive because of his ability to just stick with that discipline of that 1-2 down the pipe, knowing that the eventual takedown will come. He does a great job in terms of masking those takedowns and really bull rushing his opponents into those bad spots, whether it's up against the cage where he eventually gets their back and starts riding them and starts wearing them down. The Uriel performance may not be the prettiest, but he did a great job in terms of really keeping Uriel away from getting off on his big power. He slowed him down, he wore him down, and then in the second round, once he sensed that Uriel was broken, he showed him the door by landing big shots and eventually getting that TKO stoppage. Trained obviously by the Jackson Wink guys. Hokit obviously has good training partners, good head coaches to really maximize his ability to be successful in the mixed martial arts world, powered by that wrestling. But again, great conditioning, good cardio, good understanding of the mixed martial arts game, and a great understanding of how to mash it all together and be successful, especially with the low-level heavyweights that are on the UFC roster. It wouldn't surprise me if Hokit's able to get into the top 10 within the next year, depending on how active he can stay. Now he's going up against Max Gimenis. I'm probably butchering it. I apologize. But this is a guy, 4-fight winning streak. He only lost, I believe, his 3rd pro fight where he got knocked out in about a minute and a half. But this guy, high-level BJJ black belt out of the Maryland area. Obviously a Brazilian fighter that ended up moving there. And he's pretty much finished all but one of his fights in the first round and then won one of those fights by decision. But that was a fight where, his opponent didn't really offer up much resistance. He was able to quickly get those takedowns and then really just control from that top position, not get to a position where he could get a finish either. And his cardio didn't look all that bad, but I think it was largely due to the fact that he wasn't facing much adversity in the first place or much resistance either, that allowed him to just kind of grind out those positions, catch his breath, and then get back to the grinding. There's a lot of question marks about his striking still because he gets to the grappling right away. I'm going to assume since he got knocked out in March of 2023, he's not all that comfortable in the striking realm. The main thing that I've been seeing from him is that he likes to throw a lot of kicks. Once he gets the kick and gets the respect of his opponent, that's where he tries to mix in the takedowns behind it and get to his opponents that way. He's trained alongside the likes of Alexander Romanov, who's also from the Maryland region, Muhammad Ali, if you guys remember that guy from the Contender Series, who was a big favorite but ended up getting knocked down in the first round by Iwo Barnowski. And he seems like he went up to Philadelphia to train alongside Kyle Dawkins in preparation for this matchup as well. But again, all of his wins on the regional scene were him just bull rushing his opponents and then just either getting that quick TKO opportunity or that submission. Another guy that needs more grooming before getting to the UFC. I get it. He's 32 years old, so he's probably just trying to make the most of what he has available to him right now. But this is a bad first matchup for him in the UFC against Josh Hokit, who should do a good enough job in terms of keeping Gimenis away from his BJJ. This could look similar to the Guilherme Uriel fight, where we see Hokit just take that slow and steady approach of keeping Gimenis on his back foot, pushing him against the cage, getting his back, riding him from that top position, out scrambling Gimenis as well. And I think Hokit just eventually TKOs him. I think it probably comes in the second or third round. The over 1.5 at slight plus money, it caught my eye, but I feel like that finish could happen roughly around that 2.5 minute mark in the second round. So the spot that I'd be looking at is the fight to start round 2. I'll be interested to see what that prop looks like when those props start to drop on these sports books. But I think Hokit eventually forces Gimenis to quit due to exhaustion, just musters up a barrage of shots, whether it's up against the cage with Gimenis in turtle position, whatever it is. I think Hokit eventually gets him out of there, out cardioing him and just outworking him completely. So I like Hokit and Hokit by TKO here. All right, next up in the women's bantamweight division, we got former title challenger Mayra Bueno Silva looking to buck a 3-fight losing streak, coming in as a plus 210 underdog, going up against the streaking Jacqueline Cavalcanti, who just earned her 7th straight victory last time around against Julia Avila. But we'll start off on the former title challenger side of things here with Bueno Silva, who started this losing streak with a loss in a vacant title fight in January of 2024 against Raquel Pennington. She had some decent early success, but it seems like she gassed out, and Pennington was easily able to outwork her for the last 4 rounds of that fight to win that fight on the scorecards. Then we saw a bit of an aggressive version of Bueno Silva when she went up against Macy Chiasson, easily winning that first round. But in the second round, she kind of accepted that back position, and that's where Chiasson landed a nasty elbow to open up a nasty cut on Bueno Silva that, when the doctor took a look at it, was forced to stop the fight, and we end up seeing Silva lose by TKO. Then her last fight against Jasmine Jazz Davicius, where Jazz Davicius did a great job in terms of hiding takedowns behind strikes, and then once Jazz Davicius got the fight to the ground, we saw Jazz Davicius really control the majority of that matchup, more than half of that fight, and easily grind that fight out to win it on the scorecards. So Silva has fallen down a few pegs after that big win she had over Holly Holm that got her the title shot. You might see that on the graphics here. It says that no contest behind that Holly Holm fight, and I believe it was due to a failed drug test, but the UFC seemingly didn't care, as 6 months later they just gave her a title shot, but she's really not performing at the level that got her to that place in the first place. She's an aggressive Muay Thai fighter, has a nasty submission game as well, but she leaves plenty of openings for opponents to get the better of her. She has a sketchy cardio game as well, as we've been seeing in a couple of her fights recently. But she leaves a lot of openings. She can be grinded out from that top position as well, even though she can be aggressive off her back at times. If opponents have good enough submission defense, they're able to stifle that and then get off on some good work from that top position. Now, Cavalcanti on the other side of things, 7-fight winning streak, I believe 4-0 now in the UFC. Former LFA champion, got signed pretty much right after she won the title against eventual UFC signee Melissa Croden, but she has gone to 4 straight decisions now, defeating Zara Farron, Josiane Nunes, Nora Cornell, and then Julia Avila, largely fueled by her striking. She does a great job in terms of maintaining distance, letting off on combinations, good kicks as well. The improvements in her defensive grappling game have obviously attributed to or contributed to this winning streak of hers. And then from there, she does a great job in terms of just picking opponents apart. Good footwork, good range management, 70-inch reach at the bantamweight division. Pretty long for most women as well. So a lot of women kind of struggle to close that distance. Even in this fight, she has a 2-inch height advantage, 4-inch reach advantage, and I think that might be tough for Bueno Silva to overcome. What makes me a little bit queasy in terms of taking that chalk on Cavalcanti here is the fact that Silva could make things interesting with her aggressive Muay Thai approach. I think Cavalcanti will make Silva pay for a lot of her aggressiveness, and that will lead to Cavalcanti just landing better shots and making it look better for the judges. But that constant forward movement of Silva, and maybe even her threatening with a few submissions, could cause Cavalcanti some problems and may weigh a little bit higher in the judges' eyes. So I expect this fight to be a little bit closer. I would lean Silva by submission for her method of victory, but my prediction is actually going to be Cavalcanti by decision. I think she'll be able to avoid most of that grappling danger from Silva and then just land better shots on the feet. But again, a fight that will end up being closer than the odds indicate. I think the reason it's as wide as it is the momentum of these women, right? You see Silva on a 3-fight losing streak and you see Cavalcanti on a 7-fight winning streak. I get the recency bias on the line here. I think the right person is favored. I just think the line is too wide, but I don't have enough confidence on the Silva side of things to take the plunge on her underdogs odds either. So I'm going to go Cavalcanti by decision. Next up in the featherweight division, we got Amil coming in at -150, going up against Jamal Emmers, who comes in at +130. Now, kicking off things on the Amil side of things, he suffered his first pro loss last time out when he got starched by Jose Delgado in a fight that I was really back and forth about when I broke down initially. Going into it, I expected to pick Delgado because of his striking advantages, speed, and his power. But then I found myself on the Amil side of things. I don't recall if I ended up betting him or not that night, but I thought Amil would be able to really just lean on his durability, which has held up really well going into that matchup, and then utilize that smothering grappling approach, the poor man's Merab Dvalishvili type of approach that he normally uses. But Delgado didn't give him any chance of getting to that type of game as he starched him in, 26 seconds. He got him out of there pretty quickly. So very unfortunate way for Amil to suffer his first pro loss, but it's a lesson that he learned from it. I think he can still come back from it and have a decent enough UFC career, even at 35 years old. This guy is a Scrap Pack guy. If you guys are kind of newer to the MMA game, Scrap Pack was Gilbert Melendez's team over there in the Bay Area, I believe it was. Kind of closely associated with the Diaz brothers. I think Jake Shields at a certain point. I could be off on that. I don't recall off the top of my head. But Gilbert Melendez, former Strikeforce champion, challenged for the UFC title as well. Very high level lightweight from back in the day. And Amil has pretty much been training under him for a long time. He's pretty much been Melendez's protege for a very long time. And I'm glad that he made it to the UFC. He has a very fun style, often moves forward, often puts a lot of pressure on his opponents, breaks them down, and then beats them in deep water or grinds them out and win fights on the scorecards. He's a little slow on the feet, so that does leave him susceptible to getting hit by good punchers, but his durability has often held up well enough for him to battle through that and still get to his game and wear his opponents down. Now, he's going up against the athletically superior Jamal Emmers, who's been doing nothing but alternating wins and losses ever since making it to the UFC back in early 2020 actually. His first fight was a split decision loss to Giga Chikadze, and then he would go 4-3 over his next 7 UFC fights, 4-4 overall as an MMA fighter or a UFC fighter. In the last 5 fights alone, you can look at it here. Hassan Askabov beat him by decision. Lost close decision to Jack Jenkins. Knocked out Dennis Bazookia pretty quickly. Got knocked out by Nate Landwehr after having major success of his own, almost finishing Landwehr himself. He ended up blowing his gas tank and ended up paying for it in the same round. And then last time out against Gabriel Miranda, really just butchered him on the feet and then landed those big shots to get him out of there. So Emmers, is a guy that I think has largely underachieved since coming to the UFC. He was a guy that was a former LFA champion, had a solid 17-4 record coming into the UFC, but now finds himself 21-8, 36 years old, slowing down just a tad. His durability is a little bit of a question mark. His fight IQ, I think, can be the culprit of why he has such a had such a mediocre UFC career thus far. Playing heel hook games with a guy like Pat Sabatini, or not grappling enough against guys like Giga Chikadze. So he's kind of shot himself in the foot with a lot of these performances, but then you see, his glimpses of brilliance when he beats I believe Askabov was undefeated at the time, and then the way he handled Gabriel Miranda as well. So this one, it's kind of I don't want to say a complete toss-up, because I do think Amil is the side. I think that he can get to his grappling. I think he can wear Emmers down, but Emmers, with his speed and athleticism advantage, could find some early success and maybe really make Amil pay early. Emmers has some stinging power. Emmers has some good speed. He is a little wild at times with the way that he throws his strikes, his chin up in the air, winging these big shots. But if Amil can kind of see that coming and then engage in the grappling and the clinch with Emmers, I think that's where he can start wearing Emmers down and start pulling away with this fight in deeper water. Again, if Amil was the underdog, I'd probably be a little bit more interested in taking a shot on him here. But I feel like this is one of those spots where he's going to slowly start wearing Emmers down. And I think this fight goes over 2.5, which I believe is roughly at plus money, and then Amil by decision as well, which is at decent plus money as well. I think it's going to be hard for Amil to put Emmers away. Emmers' cardio not completely horrible as long as he doesn't go balls to the wall like he did against Nate Landwehr. But I think that we'll see Amil just slowly wear him down and grind this fight out. Winner on the scorecards. So I would lean more so with the Amil decision prop as a bet rather than taking his minus 150 money line. All right. Middleweights up next here, as we have Christian Leroy Duncan coming in at plus 165, going up against Marco Tulio, who's coming in at minus 190. Now, starting off on the Duncan side of things, he's on a 2-fight winning streak ever since losing that matchup against Gregory Rodriguez. That was a fight where he really couldn't get to his game and Rodriguez pretty much bullied him. But we have seen solid improvements from Duncan throughout his UFC career. In his 4 wins that he's had over his last 5 fights, the way that he's engaged in the clinch and worn these guys down, showcasing great head positioning as well by pinning opponents up against the cage, really driving his forehead into their chin and keeping them against the cage, and then landing some good body shots, some good knees, slowly wearing them down that way. And then when he breaks out back into space, we get back to his classic flashy power striking style of throwing spinning stuff. And, that's what he caught Eric Anders with once he was able to break out into space, that spinning elbow, and then followed up with big shots after that. But he's a big, long, rangy guy that is very strong when he engages in the clinch. So it's very encouraging to see him work on that clinch game, because that helps him exaggerate the rest of his striking style as he starts wearing his opponents down, rather than just going, head hunting immediately and hoping to knock his opponents out. He is a guy that often deals with opponents looking to take him to the ground, and historically he's done a great job in terms of keeping fights upright. He does a good job in terms of fighting the hands, creating a big enough base against the cage that opponents struggle to get their hands around him and then drag him to the ground. We saw him break in the Gregory Rodriguez fight. We saw him struggle in the Armin Petrosian fight, but I think he learned a lot of big lessons from there, hence why he's now on a 2-fight winning streak, and a guy that I can see breaking into the rankings if he continues this type of success. Now, speaking of success, Marco Tulio earned his 10th straight victory last time around as he finished Trishan Gore in a matchup where he did get rocked early in that first round, but he managed to gather his wits about him, rocked Gore right back, and then eventually finished him in the opening seconds of the second round. And that continues to add to his finishing streak now, which is 4 straight fights that he's finished. The one that he struggled to finish and ended up winning by decision was his first Contender Series opportunity, where he went up against Rusri Belgorui, who just made his UFC debut a couple weeks back and pulled off the upset against Azamat Bakoyev. Tulio then was forced back to the regional scene, picked up a win with the LFA promotion, and then got another opportunity on the Contender Series, got a big knockout there, and now has pulled up 2 back-to-back knockouts against Ihor Potieria and Trishan Gore. He's a guy that's leaned largely on his striking, coming from the Shoot to Box Diego Lima camp, training alongside Charles Oliveira. This guy brings violence pretty much every time he fights. But I think a lot of those fights are fights that he can kind of control and intimidate his opponents and really dictate the pace. With Belgorui, he was able to engage in the clinch and land some takedowns and get some clinch time to really demoralize Belgorui from getting to his kickboxing style. Against Potieria, he could do the same. Against Trishan Gore, he could do the same. Even moving backwards, he's a good sniper in terms of planting his feet when he does eventually find the opening, landing his big shots, and then getting back on his bicycle. He's a little slow at times, and his striking defense can be an issue. And I think that's ultimately what could cause him some big issues here against Christian Leroy Duncan. Now, I see, when I studied this fight first, I thought this would be closer to a pick'em. So to see Tulio at minus 190 is very surprising. This is not Ihor Potieria he's going up against. This is not even Trishan Gore that he's going up against. He's going up against Christian Leroy Duncan, who is really coming into his own. And if people want to compare Marco Tulio to Gregory Rodriguez, I think they're wandering in the wrong direction. I think Tulio is dangerous. Obviously, 10-fight winning streak goes to boot there. But I don't think he'll have the type of striking success here against Duncan as he had against these past guys. Because I think that 5-inch reach advantage for Duncan, 2-inch height advantage, but more importantly, the speed advantage. I think Duncan can kind of tread this fight at distance and really find those sniper-like shots down the pipe against Tulio. And again, I don't think Tulio has been hit by guys with the type of power that Duncan brings to the table. I believe Anders had never been finished by knockout going into that fight against Duncan, and Duncan caught him with the perfect shot to put him away. I think Duncan can do the same thing here against Tulio. So don't be surprised to see Tulio look to get to takedowns after his striking does not work out as much for him. I think we'll see Duncan stop those takedowns and keep this fight upright. And then from there, it's just a matter of time before Duncan lands a big shot and puts Tulio away. I get it. The resume and momentum and everything looks great on the Tulio side, but put him up against a guy that can present the threats that Duncan does, and I don't think Tulio can replicate what Gregory Rodriguez did. So I like Duncan here. I like Duncan by knockout, and I love this plus 165 line. I'm going to take full advantage of that. All right, next up, in the bantamweight division, we got Ricky Simón coming in at minus 160, going up against Raoni Barcelos, who comes in at plus 140. Starting off on the Simón side of things, it was a rough run for him as he went on a 3-fight losing streak from 2023 to 2024, although, losses to Yadong Song in his first ever UFC main event, to getting outstruck and butchered by Mario Bautista, to even losing against Vinicius Oliveira. Those are all understandable losses. But the way he came back and pulled off the big upset knockout victory over Javid Basharat was very impressive. Then we got that classic Ricky Simón style last time out against Cameron Smotherman, where he mixed his power striking behind his wrestling and his control, and we saw Simón get his hand raised again. This is a guy that I think is similar to Jamal Emmers, kind of underachieved in his UFC career, but he has kind of just fell short in those big spots whenever he gets those opportunities. He's had a few decent winning streaks, but then always fell short when it was like a big time matchup. Even the Uriah Faber loss that he has from a couple years back, that was a co-main event in Sacramento, and he got knocked out by a guy in Faber who doesn't knock anybody out, right? Especially at that stage in his career. So I don't know if it was like the jitters of having so many eyes on him, Faber being a legend the way that he was, but Simón came up short that night. But this is a guy that can still crack, just as we saw in the Basharat fight, and a guy that can still reliably wrestle when he needs to, just as we saw in the Cameron Smotherman fight. Now he's going up against Raoni Barcelos, who has really put together a solid winning streak as of late. He went 1-4 between 2021 and 2023, but now he finds himself on a 3-fight winning streak, submitting Christian Quinones in a fight that was very much a toss-up going into that third round, pulling off a plus 700 underdog upset against Peyton Talbot to start off the year, and then battling back from a rough first round against Cody Garbrandt earlier this year, and then winning that fight on the scorecards. I thought Garbrandt was looking good in that first round, sticking and moving, showcasing good takedown defense, and really showcasing his speed advantage against Barcelos. But it seemed like that constant forward movement, that constant combination style of Barcelos start to break Garbrandt. And then in that second and third round, that's where we saw Barcelos completely take over. Barcelos is a guy that I feel has been highly underrated throughout his UFC career, but after that losing streak that he had, I started to feel as though his age was starting to catch up to him. 37, 38 years old in the bantamweight division, very hard to be successful, especially as your physical attributes start to decline. Very good Muay Thai specialist, great kicks, good combinations, good wrestling. I think he was a part of the Brazilian national wrestling team several years ago. So obviously we've seen him lean on that, most notably the Peyton Talbot fight. And he has pretty good jiu-jitsu as well. But it's the lack of athleticism in some of his fights that has cost him these spots. Even the Kyler Phillips fight I thought was a perfect example of that. He can be dangerous. He's very skilled. But in this matchup specifically, I think he's going to be behind it. He won't have enough of a wrestling edge here to grind Simone out and stay away from the power striking style of Simone. Technically speaking, Barcelos is the better striker, but I think he's going to struggle to keep up with the speed and power coming back his way from the Simone side of things. So I think we'll see Simone mix it up. I think we'll see him utilize his big power punching, which I think eventually leads to a knockout victory for Simone, but he could also get to his grappling where, Barcelos, good BJJ, good wrestling. I just don't think it's at a point where he can really contest with Simone should they go scramble for scramble. So I'm going to go Simone here. I'm going to go Simone by knockout. I was teetering on making him a very high confidence spot, but I don't want to overlook Barcelos once again. I'm going to give him the respect he deserves, but I still feel Simone will do a good enough job in terms of winning the majority of this matchup with his power and his wrestling, and I think he eventually leads to a knockout win. All right. Lightweights up next here as we have the streaking Chris Padilla coming in at plus 170, going up against Ismael Bonfim, who comes in at minus 200. Yes, Bonfim. This is the brother of Gabriel, who headlines this card. But we'll start off first on the Padilla side of things, who has pulled off a handful of upsets since joining the UFC. The first of which was that short notice matchup against James Longtop, where he ended up getting the submission victory. Then he got that knockout victory over Rong Zhu in a fight where he won the first round, started to be a little bit more competitive in that second round, but then we saw the cleanest elbow to an eye socket that we'll ever see in mixed martial arts, and that immediately blew Rong Zhu's eye up. And then once the judge saw that, he called off the fight immediately, and deservedly so. So good win from Padilla there. And then last time around, a split decision victory against Jai Herbert. Very, very close fight. But mainly due to the fact that it was very tepid paced. Not a whole lot of volume from both guys. Both guys were kind of just waiting on the other. It seemed like Padilla was waiting to counter Herbert, while Herbert was looking for that big shot from Padilla and then looking to ring some punches together behind that. But it looked like Padilla did his best work when he was able to wrangle Herbert up against the cage and land some knees, because those were the most significant scenarios throughout that fight because of how hesitant and tough it was for them to get off on damage in that open space. I thought Herbert did enough, I believe, in that third round, in that final round. But luckily, two judges thought he did enough to win the first two rounds, and that was enough for him to get that win. It was that first round that I thought was quite close, if I remember correctly. Power puncher, explosive, has some good finishing instincts, has some great experience now as well, has a grappling game that he can kind of lean on, but, I don't think to the level of, these higher rank lightweight guys, and I think we'll see him challenge here against a guy in Ismael Bonfim, who is rightfully the favorite at minus 200. Now Bonfim is 1-3 in his last 1-2 in his last three fights. The last one being a doctor stoppage loss to Nazim Sadikhov in a fight that I thought he would really start to run away with in the second and third rounds. It was in that first round where I believe two judges scored that round for Sadikhov and one scored it for Bonfim. Very competitive fight, but I believe it was a knee that ultimately ended up opening a cut on the cheek of Bonfim, and the judge or the doctor deemed it too much, and they stopped it after round one. I still believe there was some sort of miscommunication in terms of the translation between the commission person, the doctor, and Bonfim. And I don't think Bonfim wanted that fight stopped, but it ended up getting stopped anyway. But Bonfim is very, skilled all around. A very good volume striker, just as we saw when he defeated Vince Pichel on the scorecards. Very good grappler when he can lean on that as well. Obviously, he struggled with Benoit Saint-Denis' constant pace, pressure, and then eventually that choke that he was able to set up. But Bonfim is better than this current 1-2 run that he's on. That 20-5 record is very, very impressive, especially when you look at the regional run that he had and the types of guys that he was doing it against. Not a crazy knockout puncher, but he does have some good sting on his shots. He can strike with the best of them. He can grapple with the best of them as well. And the way he just blends it all together makes him a very dangerous and difficult opponent to overcome. Now for Padilla, this is a very tough obstacle to overcome. James Lawrentop was mainly a brawler. Padilla was able to get the better of him. Rongju, competitive fight, doctor stoppage. And then the Jai Herbert fight, again, way too much hesitancy from both sides. I don't think we'll see that hesitancy here from Bonfim. I think Bonfim will try to take advantage or at least dictate the pace of this fight immediately. That will be with him mixing it up in the pocket, mixing in some takedowns, some clinch work. And I think he has good enough durability to really take the best shot from Padilla and then swing back more with some bigger shots of his own. I like Bonfim a good bit here. The uncertainty of Padilla kind of makes me a little bit hesitant, but I feel like this is one of those spots where like maybe that hesitancy in my mind is being over exaggerated, and I should have that legitimate confidence on the Bonfim side to go out there and do what he does best. And I expect him to do it here. I think he's beaten much better fighters. I think he's finished much better fighters, but I think that Padilla will hold strong, and that will eventually lead to Bonfim winning this fight on the scorecards. But I don't mind him at minus 200. All right, next up in the welterweight division, the same division that the main event takes place in 2 fights later, we got Muslim Salikhov coming in at plus 150, going up against Uroš Medic, who comes in at minus 175. Now, starting off on the Salikhov side of things, he is on a 3-fight winning streak, and he's 41 years old. Absolutely crazy. First of which was that split decision win over Santiago Ponzinibbio. Then he caught Kenan Song with the spinning wheel kick. And then last time around, he clipped Carlos Leal 42 seconds into that fight to pull off that major upset to get the win there. And again, earn his 3rd straight victory. The king of Kung Fu is exactly that. This guy likes to throw a lot of spinning techniques, a lot of spinning wheel kicks, a lot of spinning body kicks. Has some thudding power as well that's very underrated. Obviously, his speed and his durability is falling a little bit, but if he sees the perfect matchup in the openings, he can definitely crack and really hurt his opponents to try to put them away that way. Seeing that he's getting much older and seeing that he might need to put himself in spots where he feels uncomfortable to try to still be successful, he actually moved his training camp over to Denver to pound for pound Muay Thai, which I believe is the same camp as Tisha Pennington, who trains out of that gym. We've seen a lot of other fighters out of that gym as well. Who's the other guy? There's another name that's escaping me. Neil Magny. He's been able to share the cage with him, or the training room with him as well. But again, it's all about the striking for Salikhov. And I thought that Carlos Leal fight was in hindsight, a good spot for him because of the way Leal recklessly crashes the pocket with big shots. I think Salikhov and his team did a great job in terms of breaking that fight down and then eventually knowing what counter to throw to catch Leal off guard, and he landed the perfect shot to put him away. Now he's going up against a little bit more of a methodical striker now in Uroš Medic, who has been exchanging wins and losses over his last 5 fights, most recently earning that knockout victory over Gilbert Urbina, which was absolutely nasty. And this is a guy that, coming into the UFC, I wasn't that high on. I used to just call him a glass cannon and a guy that would ultimately get put away pretty easily. But I've given him some more respect now, especially that win he had against Matthew Semmelsberger. I was very impressed with what he was able to do that night, especially against a guy in Semmelsberger who had recorded so many knockdowns in such a short period of time. I was very surprised he couldn't get Medic out of there. But I successfully faded Medic with Uralbai. I successfully bet on Medic to finish Tamins. I was able to cash Soriano against Medic, and then last time around, I believe I was able to cash the under 1.5 against Gilbert Urbina because I just knew it was going to be chaos. Medic is a guy I believe he's never been to the scorecards in 14 pro fights. He's only ever made it to the third round once, and that was the night that he ended up finishing Matthew Summelsberger in the final round of their fight. But it's a guy that is taking a lot of this experience and adding it to his game very well. At his best, he utilizes that 6'1" height and 71-inch reach to the best of his abilities by sniping opponents from distance and utilizing that stinging power. He's getting better in terms of managing his distance, and I think that helps him kind of exaggerate his skills from distance, especially with the power that he can bring to the table. He also has a sneaky choke game as well, but we don't see that as often at this stage of his career. It's hard to overlook the potential value you can get on Salikhov, given his striking prowess and the run that he's on as of late. But I feel like Medic will be more methodical than what we saw from Lyell. I think we'll see Medic pick Salikhov apart from distance and eventually find that big shot to put the 41-year-old away. Very tough to bet a 41-year-old in this climate, right? Like, it's not often that 40-year-olds do well in the UFC. Salikhov obviously trying to rain on my parade in that by pulling off 3 straight wins here. But I think it comes down to the stylistic matchup. I think the 9-year youth advantage of Medic, the speed advantage, and the power that he has will help him get out of some bad spots. I think this fight ends inside 1.5 rounds, so that might be the best way to go about it, because Salikhov could absolutely catch Medic as well. So a little bit more of a coin flip, but I have to give the edge to Medic because of his youth, his speed, his length, and I think that's going to help him really land that straight shot down the pipe here against Salikhov. Again, it's only a 1-inch reach advantage for Medic, but I think that's exaggerated by the speed and the way that he likes to do his work from distance as well. So look for that speed to land on Salikhov and earn Medic a knockout victory, but I would rather go with the under 1.5 than take the minus 175 on Medic's money line. All right. That brings us to the flyweight co-main event now, where we got Matt Danger Schnell coming in at plus 230, going up against Joseph Morales, who comes in at minus 270. Now, Schnell is coming off of a win that snapped a 3-fight losing streak he had going into that matchup. He had been knocked out by Matthias Nicolau, knocked out by Steve Ursig, submitted by Cody Durden, and then last time out, he had a tough first round against Jimmy Flick, but then he managed to get the fight back into his favor in the second and third rounds, shocking off the submission attempts of the very aggressive Jimmy Flick, and then battering him on the feet with the striking advantage he held as well. It's always surprising to me to hear Matt Schnell in the UFC still. I'm not saying he's a bad fighter, but I think it's just, he's been around for a long time. It always seems to be like he's like, when I think about him, I just think about him losing. But he has a 7-7 record in the promotion. He's 1-3 over his last 4 fights. So that's another thing to take into consideration as well. And he's 35 years old. I believe every time he's lost as well, he's been finished, which is also another big, tough spot for him as well. Like dealing with guys that are good enough submission specialists or good enough power that they can really put him away that way. Entertaining fighter. I think that's why he's still on the roster. Often always in contention for a fight of the night bonus, performance bonus as well, just like he had against Sumo Darji, I believe. Fun fighter. But I think he's up against a tough one here in Joseph Morales, who successfully earned his way back to the UFC through the Ultimate Fighter and pulling off a big upset victory over Alibi Idris just a few months ago, submitting Idris in the second round of their matchup. A lot of people, including myself, picked Idris to win that fight because I thought he could keep Morales away from his grappling, but Idris was throwing a lot of unorthodox and flashy strikes that took a lot of energy, and that eventually led to him slowing down, Morales taking over, and eventually getting that submission. Morales, had a tough first run in the UFC. I believe he went 1-2 in those 3 fights. He went 8-0 coming into the UFC back in 2017, but then won that first fight. I can't recall who it was against in that first matchup, but then he lost to Davison Figueiredo and Eric Shelton and was promptly removed from the UFC roster after that. He went on a solid 3-fight winning streak on the regional scene, got invited to the Ultimate Fighter, and eventually got to the finale to pick that win up. But this is a guy that's been pretty much entrenched in mixed martial arts his entire career. He is a guy that grew up with Team Alpha Male, and you can see the comfort that he has in the cage, from his striking game to his wrestling to his BJJ, which is where I think he is best. And I think he got a bad shake in that first run in the UFC back in the day. So for him to get this opportunity again at 31 years old, showcasing the type of performance that he had against Alibi last time, this is a guy that could eventually break into the UFC rankings. And I think this is a perfect matchup for him to go out there and showcase that here against Schnell. Schnell might have a little bit of a striking advantage, but I don't think it's so much so to the point that it'll keep Morales from getting to his grappling game. Look for Morales to really touch up Schnell or counter him, mix in the takedowns, and then from there eventually get the back of Schnell and sink in a submission. Minus 270, a little bit wide. I don't want to be swinging too far on the pendulum on Morales, but this is a very, very winnable fight for him, and I expect him to eventually get that submission here to force the tap from Matt Schnell. So give me Morales and Morales by submission, and if I can get that submission prop at anything better than plus 200, I'll probably take a shot on that, considering the majority of Schnell's losses have come by submission. All right. That brings us right to the main event now, which goes down in the welterweight division, where we have Gabriel Bonfim coming in at minus 185, going up against Randy Rude Boy Brown coming in at plus 160. Bonfim is slowly distancing himself from that first pro loss that he suffered at the hands of Nicholas Dalby, where it seemed like he went a little bit too hard too early, and then Dalby was able to utilize his pace, pressure, and cardio advantage to eventually find that late second round finish over Bonfim. That was a big upset victory, if you guys remember that one. But since then, Bonfim has pulled off a decision against Angelosa, where he looked a little bit more in control of his gas tank and, managing his gas tank and activity much better. Then he was able to submit Chaos Williams with a nasty choke. I don't think Chaos thought it was on tight enough, but he ended up paying for it as he ended up going to sleep. And then in the Wonderboy Thompson fight, kind of controversial there, right? It was like damage against control, and for some reason the judges ended up scoring the control of Bonfim, and he was able to get that split decision win over the former, I think, two-time title challenger, Wonderboy Thompson. But still, not a great look for Bonfim, and the possible cardio issues he has, especially coming into his first main event fight this weekend. On the feet, very solid. Good kicks, good striking. I wish he'd have a little bit more confidence in his striking, because when he does get a little bit too desperate, he starts shooting takedowns, and that's where he starts gassing himself out and slowing down a lot, because he is so dangerous with his submission game. He does such a good job of applying submissions and getting most of his opponents to tap, with 13 of his 18 wins coming by submission. So you get why he wants to get there as soon as he can, but I believe it was just like the Contender Series fight that he had, where he struck his way into takedown, or struck his way into the submission, and that's what made him so successful even on the regional scene. Now, trying to apply that to his UFC career will be much more beneficial. Be confident in your kicking game. Be confident in your hands and your speed, and then the submission or club and sub opportunity will eventually come, or easier takedown attempts will end up coming for the Brazilian. Now, he's going up against Randy Brown, who had an unfortunate split decision loss to Brian Battle just 2 fights ago, but he did manage to get back to his winning ways, where he knocked out Nicholas Dalby in a fight that was pretty much rooted in bad blood. I think there was a lot of conversation from Dalby about Brown being much like a fouler, like a guy that often like pokes his opponents in the eyes. And I think there was 1 or 2 instances in his fight with Dalby where Brown did poke Dalby, but Brown like took it too hard, and he fought with some like vitriol. I think Dalby even rocked Brown a little bit too early on in that fight, but then Brown got his wits back about him and really forced Dalby to swing in the pocket with him, and Brown was just the better technician at that point, and he was able to land that big shot on Dalby. And I think that was Dalby's first loss by finish, or at least first loss by knockout. So kind of just shows how much bad blood kind of affected that fight, at least in my opinion. But normally Brown is a guy that kind of chips away at his opponents from distance. He doesn't really chase knockouts too often. Like even against Muslim Salikhov, he kind of set that knockout perfectly to get Salikhov out of there. There have been issues in his grappling game at times where opponents have put him in bad spots and either submitted him or at least were able to just keep him in those spots and wear him out that way. He is working on it, without a doubt. He is definitely working on those aspects of his game. But it's clear he is best when he can utilize that 6'3" height and 78-inch reach to just pick his opponents apart from distance, that sniping type style, and really just doing his best work on the feet. I expect Brown to have the cardio edge in this matchup, which is bad news for Bonfim if he wants to desperation grapple right off the bat. But I find it too hard to really get behind Brown in this spot because I feel like Bonfim can get him to the ground, and it might only take 1, 2, maybe 3 takedowns for Bonfim to eventually get to a position where he can find the submission. I think Bonfim is too good of a submission specialist for Brown to survive long enough on the ground. Before Bonfim's cardio issues maybe start to impact the fight. And then on the feet, I think Bonfim cracks a little bit more. Brown is the better striker, but I think Bonfim is more capable of finding a finish. So I get why Brown is the underdog. I can't completely get behind Bonfim at chalk because of the potential cardio issues he could run into. But I think he eventually gets this fight to the ground. I think he eventually finds a choke, and I think he ends up submitting Brown here. So maybe I'll look at the Bonfim submission prop. I already like the under 2.5 at slight plus money. I feel like there's going to be violence here, whether it's Bonfim getting that early submission or Brown catching him and putting him away in the second or early third round. If you can get an alternate total of 3.5 and you can bet the under 3.5, that might be a little bit safer. But I don't mind plus money on the 2.5. But in terms of an official prediction, I am going to go Gabriel Bonfim by submission. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC Vegas 111. Very happy to finally get this breakdown done. It's been a struggle for me as of late in terms of just getting into that studying mode and really just trying to lock in. So I do apologize for the tardiness, but I will be back tomorrow for my the top 3 lock of the night candidates video, my chalk or not video, but also my members only YouTube live stream. So if you want to talk about this breakdown, talk about some of the predictions that I made, I'll see you guys tomorrow, aka Wednesday, from 6 p.m. Eastern to 7 p.m. Eastern. Hope to see you guys there. All right. Good luck on all your action, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.
Last thing.